So what is a greatest common factor? Y'all said you've heard that before. What does that mean? Well, what's a factor of something? You don't know? So if I say, give me the factors of 6, what do you mean equals 6? Whatever multiplies to be 6, right? So your greatest common factor is going to be the biggest factor that your two numbers or whatever numbers have in common. So like when we're factoring a GCF from our big polynomials, I like to think it's like the biggest thing that you could divide every term by. So we're going to do a lot of that. Like I was saying earlier, factoring is when you're writing the expression as the product of two or more expressions. So it's the opposite of multiplying. So again, we're kind of working backwards from like what we did last week. So like you're given the answer and we got to figure out what they multiplied to get there. So factoring expression means to write the expression as the product of two or more expressions, and it is the opposite of multiplying. So last week was all about multiplying. Today is all about, or this week's going to be all about undoing multiplication, essentially. So factors, we got to figure out what those are first. So if we're talking about the factored form of 6, that means what multiplies to be 6? 3 times 2. What else can multiply to be 6? 6 times 1. That okay? So either one there would work. Well, how would you factor x squared? What's going to give you x squared? X times x. Yeah, exactly. Is that all right? All right. So we said that this is kind of like undoing that multiplication. So if we were looking at something like this, what would you do to simplify that? Distribute, right? So we would say 7 times a, and what do we get? And then you multiply 7 times b, and what do you get? 7b. So now we're being given that answer. We've got to work backwards. So what did they multiply out to get here? So when you're thinking of your GCF, it's like, what can I divide both of these by? 7, right? So I like to put 7, 7, and we'll write that GCF out front. So whatever you're dividing everything by. And then what is 7a divided by 7? Just a. And what is 7b divided by 7? Plus b. Is that all right? Questions so far? All right. So again, your greatest common factor is like the largest term that we could divide everything by. Say that. So if we're looking at that first example there, we've got 10xy plus 14x. So what's a number that we could divide both 10 and 14 by? Is there anything bigger? If you divide 10 by 2, what do you get? What's 14 divided by 2? So 5 and 7. Are there any more common factors between those two? No. So the biggest number we could divide by would be 2. So I'm going to divide by 2. Divide by 2. Is there anything else that those two terms have in common? They both have what? So can we divide by x as well? Yeah. So you're trying to pick out the biggest thing that they both have in common. So we're going to write our GCF, which is 2x out front. And then inside our parentheses, we'll put our answer after we divide here. So 10 divided by 2, what do we get? 5. Then x divided by x, what happens? Cancels out. And what are we left with? 1. Then we have 14 divided by 2. What is that? And then x divided by x again, what happens? Cancels. How could we check to be sure that this is the same thing that we started with? Distribute. So what is 2x times 5y? 10xy. Then what is 2x times 7? 14x. So that checks out. So we're good to go. Is that okay? Questions? Alright, so we're going to do the same thing for the next one. So we've got 6x squared plus 9x minus 3xy. So looking just at your numbers first, 6, 9, and 3. What's the biggest number that we could divide all of those by? 3. Is there anything else that each of those terms have in common? X, so we can divide everything by x. So what's your GCF here? 3x. We'll write that out front. And then we're going to divide each of the parts. So what's 6 divided by 3? 2. And then x squared divided by x. What are you left with? Subtract your exponent. 2 minus 1 gives you 1, so just x. Is that okay? So then looking at our second term there, what's 9 divided by 3? 3. And then x divided by x, what happens? Cancels. Then we've got negative 3 divided by 3. What is that? Negative 1. X divided by x, what happens? Cancels. And then we're just left with a y there. How could we check that that's what we started with? Or the same thing? Multiply it again. So 3x times 2x gives you 6x squared. That checks out. Then 3x times 3 gives you 9x. That's correct. And then 3x times negative 1y. So that all checks out. Yeah? Questions? You all right? Okay. So anytime you're factoring anything ever for the rest of your lives, you're always going to check for GCF first. So we are going to highlight, we are going to underline, we are going to box, because if you don't do this, you're going to screw up. And I'm going to be on you about it all the time. So anytime you're factoring anything ever, what do you always look for first? GCF. Every single time. You have to look for a GCF. Every single time. When you're factoring anything ever for the rest of forever. What are you going to look for first? GCF. Always. So eventually we're going to learn a bunch of different ways to factor. And so we're going to have a list of things that you check through every time. The first thing, what's it always going to be? GCF. Every single time you're looking for a GCF. Okay? So, fortunately for y'all, for the ones that we're going to do, they all have GCF, because that's all we know how to do right now. Okay? So we're going to do a few examples together. We've got 1 through 5 on the front, then there's a couple more on the back. So 1 through 8 total. Which ones do y'all want to do together? Pick like 2 on the front, 2 on the back. How about that? 5, 6, 4. Okay, we'll do 5, 6, 4. How about that? 4, 5, 6. Alright, so looking at number 4. We've got a bunch of different numbers, coefficients going on. You got 18, 9, 3, and 6. What's the biggest number that we could divide all of those numbers by? 3. So we'll divide by 3. What else do they all have in common? Y's. So y'all, when you've got variables, we want to take the smallest exponent on our variables, right? So what's the smallest exponent that we have on all our variables in common? 1, so we'll just do y to the first power. It's going to change on number 5, but we'll get there in just a second. So our GCF is what? 3y. So you've got to write that first and put it outside your parentheses. So now we're going to go and do all our division here. So 18 divided by 3, what is that? 6. Y to the 4th divided by y, what is that? Y to the 3rd. Remember, when you're dividing terms with like bases, you subtract your exponents. So we did 4 minus 1. Looking at the next one, we got negative 9 divided by 3. What is that? Negative 3. Y cubed divided by y? Y squared. Then positive 3 divided by 3. Just 1. And y squared divided by y? Just y. Then we've got negative 6y divided by 3y. So negative 6 divided by 3 gives you what? Negative 2. And when you do y divided by y, what happens? Cancels. And that's it. Questions on that? Are we going too fast? And so again, how would you check your answer to be sure it's correct? Multiply it back out. We're not going to do that this time, but if you're not sure, it would be a good idea. All right, so looking at number 5, we don't have any coefficients this time. Our leading coefficients, or excuse me, all of our coefficients are 1, right, or -1. So there's not really a number that we could divide everything by that's going to change. Because if you divide by 1, what happens? Stays the same, right? Nothing changes. So we're not even going to worry about that. What else do all of these have in common? X. So, like I said last time, you want to take your smallest exponent, because how many x's could we take from each of these terms? We could take at least 2, right? Because the smallest exponent we have is x squared. So we're going to divide everything by x squared. So let's make a note of that. Let's say look for your smallest exponent, or pull out smallest exponent. How about that? Here. Sure. Brian, can you go to guidance real quick? So what's our GCF? What are we putting out front? X squared. Okay, then we've got to do all our division. So again, when you're dividing terms of like bases, what do you do with your exponents? Subtract. So 9 minus 2 is going to give us x to the 7th. Then 5 minus 2 is going to give us x to the 3rd. Then we've got minus, what is 3 minus 2? 1, so just x to the 1st. And then x squared divided by x squared, what happens with that? It cancels. So what do we put there? Good, plus 1. You're exactly right. Is that right? And so multiply that back out to check your answer. We would have to add exponents this time. So 2 plus 7 gives you 9, that checks out. And then 2 plus 3 gives you 5. 2 plus 1 gives you 3. And then x squared times 1 is just x squared. Questions there? Alrighty. Moving on to the next one. Let's see. We said 6. That's a good one to do. Alright, so looking at number 6. I like to look at coefficients first. So we've got 42, 14, and 7. So based on those numbers, what's the biggest number we could divide all of those by? 7, right? Will 42 divide by 7 evenly? Will 14 divide by 7 evenly? Yeah. And then 7 will as well, right? So we'll divide everything by 7. What else do all of those have in common? They all have a's, right? So what's the smallest exponent that we have on an a? We got squared, cubed, squared, so we'll take a squared. Anything else they all have? B. And what's our smallest b exponent that we have? Cubed. Are you okay with pulling out that smallest exponent on the variables? Yes. Yeah. Do we have any questions right now? No. So what's our GCF for this one? Now we got to go do all our division. So 42 divided by 7, what do you get? 6. A squared divided by a squared? Cancel. B to the 5th over b to the 3rd. Can somebody grab the door, please? B to the 2nd, so b squared. That all right? Looking at the next term, what is 14 divided by 7? Then we got a cubed over a squared. What will that be? Just a. And then b to the 4th over b 3rd? Just b to the 1st. Then our last term there, you've got negative 7 divided by 7. What's that? Negative 1. Then a squared divided by a squared? cancels. B cubed divided by B cubed cancels. And that's it. Is that alright?
Yes.
Questions? Anything we're not quite sure about, don't understand? Do we need to do another one together?
8.
Do you want to do 8 together?
Yeah.
Okay. So looking at number 8, we've got our coefficients are 10, 5, and 13. What's the biggest number we can divide all those by? Is there anything else? So if we divide by 1, is that going to change anything? No, so we won't worry about doing that. What do they all have in common? Do they all have an X? Do they all have a Y? Do they all have a Z? So is there any GCF there? No? So do y'all know a word that means like you can't factor or there's no factors other than 1 in Excel? Starts with a P? Do you remember? Prime? Does that sound familiar? Yeah? So like prime numbers? That's okay. It's been a long time since you've used that word, I'm sure. So if you can't factor it for whatever reason, then you just say prime. So like for number 8, there's no GCF at all, so there's nothing else we can do there. So we're just going to call it prime, and that's it. Is that all right? Got us. Anything else? Okay, so what I want you to do right now is number 7 and 1, 2, and 3. Can we do those on our own?
Yeah.
All right, cool beans.